Weather is cold. I just came back from my persuasion class, and it's late here in Washington, D.C., the American's nation's capital. But we're doing great. So I'm excited about this presentation.
And you're welcome to start. You have 15 minutes for the presentation and hopefully 5 minutes for the talk. And we're going to have Christmas soon, of course. And I have two bowls, Christmas bowls. And yesterday I tried to show the yellow one 5 minutes before the talk is supposed to be over, and the red one, like, this is it. So I'll try to do that, but maybe we won't need it.
All right. So again, thanks for having me at your conference. So the topic I wanted to discuss today has to do with reputation management of academia as a territory of progressive science. So I specialize in what we call reputation management, which has become a matter that has no boundaries. And in our age of internet, in a way, the whole concept of time and space, I'm sure, has been compressed and it's been blurred. And so the issue of reputation affects different organizational entities pretty much across this time and space. So George Mason University, for example, has several campuses, and they're all connected through one thing, which is our mission statement and our ethics that pretty much we communicate to our students, our parents, and our major stakeholders. So because I work for Department of Communication, so every person on the faculty is responsible for first of all image and reputation of the entire structure. So starting with the department to the School of Humanities and Arts and Sciences and overall university, whether it's on the national level or international level. So, for example, when I teach in the Department of Humanities, for example, and I give my interview on television or on the radio. So in a way, when I discuss things on business or public policy, so other entities might have positive or negative reputation based on what I have to say, right? So because communication is such a multidisciplinary discipline, we talk about issues in health, in climate change, in, let's say, politics, pretty much in all those spheres. Whatever I say, my communication as a constitutive power has effect to pretty much affect different territorial boundaries. So in a way, kind of people's perception of us will get like different types of magnitude. So anyway, let me just explain how it all relates to kind of the territorial again boundaries. So one particular case I would like to talk about today is what my Center for Reputation Management does to protect several entities within the university, and one of them is a Mason Center for Climate Change Communication. So as you know, that the whole issue of climate change is not only a scientific issue, it's also issue of political debate, and where different publics in the United States, they are split by the ideological viewpoints, right? And what our center does, well, first of all, we conduct research on kind of together with some other departments on what that climate change is a serious issue, and therefore we all have to be concerned. And because a lot of those messages would not make sense to people until we create certain type of images in their heads. So we also try to kind of build the agenda for explaining to different audiences what it means to be, for example, be less proactive, about communication about climate change and what consequences it might have, right? So in a way, Climate Change Communication Center has become what we call the area of contest of different people and organizations that either believe or do not believe that climate change is a serious issue, right? And for example, a lot of them try to bring their viewpoints on television, on the radio. They try to convince their audiences, whether they're Republican and Democrats, in their agendas. And what we have seen over the years, that the issue of science, original science that has to do with environment and has to do with public health, has become like politicized, right? So in a way, it's not an issue of science anymore, it's an issue of politics. And whenever politics starts playing any type of major role on university campus, university becomes this, what we call the territory of clash of frames, where different frames contest for or against a specific issue. So the way it's presented on major websites or television screens become an issue for people living around university and people attending university. For example, students, their parents, and also people who live in near campus. Like, for example, George Mason University is located in Fairfax County, right, which is one of the largest and the richest counties in the United States. And when people hear something negative about Center for Climate Change Communication, they really become upset because, in a way, so not just the center becomes smeared, but the whole university and its image becomes smeared, right? So, so our center, which stands for CARP, or Character Assassination and Reputation Management Research Lab, has been around just for 2 years, and it eventually kind of emerged as a virtual lab where we kind of decided to do something about our image, like university image and the community relations image, through help of different experts that study what reputation is. And reputation is such a complicated construct that not only you need experts in communication, you also need experts in psychology and rhetoric and history. And in a way, our lab became this hub of multidisciplinary kind of expertise. So it's like a small think tank, right, that pretty much has all the university brains, right? Like, for example, I specialize in what we call like strategic communication and reputation management. My colleague Eric Sharaev, he's a specialist in political psychology. So he kind of studies reputation from the psychological standpoint and see how psychology affects politics. Our friend Martin X from University in Amsterdam, he's a historian, right? So he looks how reputational issues have been really major problems for persons and organizations throughout history. He goes all the way back to the ancient Rome and Greece, and he studies all the way to our time. And Jennifer Cohen from University of Baltimore, she is a rhetorician. She's an expert in rhetoric, and she explains discourse and how different messages and their power can change reality, right? So how they can construct social worlds and different perceptions of entities like universities, for example. So it depends on, for example, our expertise. We kind of develop this multi-pronged approach where we not only look at reputational cases, like, for example, climate change centers being criticized by what we call contrarians who do not believe that climate change is an issue. And then we come up with a risk assessment. We'll look at ways how to counter or develop defenses against those reputational attacks, and how to educate the public through inoculation strategies, what we can do about all those things, right? So one of our colleagues, John Cook, who I work with a lot. So he's a specialist in physics, but he became kind of communication expert when he pretty much started studying environment and the impact of climate change on the planet. So John Cook is an example of how a scientist can become a scapegoat in the eyes of a lot of skeptics who do not believe in the issue, right? So in order for them to attack the issue, that they have to personalize the issue through a person. So John Cook is one of those kind of aims, right? Originally from Australia, he came here to George Mason, and now he's working in this Center for Climate Change Center development, and he's a quite interesting communication expert. Not only he kind of figures out what's the best way to educate the public about climate change problems, but also he creates things like visual communication. So he just published a book on cartoons explaining different myths and different issues that people don't understand about climate change and its impact on the planet and the society. Like, for example, this is an example of him debunking the climate change claim that it changed in the past. So also, Dr. Cook and we work on several ways how we can work out inoculation strategies, or how we can educate the public what's the best way to deconstruct claims about climate change and maybe some misinformation, or as we call it now, fake news about scientists, right? Like, for example, if you look at this particular table, you will see, like, for example, a fact, myth, and fallacy. And one of the kind of inoculation strategies is when you first kind of focus on like educating the public by introducing both evidence and myth, where they had kind of this mistaken assumption about something, and then you explain how certain fallacies work, right? And those of us who study rhetoric, they understand that understanding fallacies is really important, right? Like, for example, for cherry picking, or like picking the certain evidences to present a particular viewpoint, is done a lot in the contrarian discourse. Like, for example, people who attack scientists, mostly they represent conservative think tanks and conservative activists and politicians in the United States. Like, for example, they have a mostly focus on myths, right? And that's what they tell the public, right? While facts could be completely different. Now, so based on kind of our research, we also do a lot of content analysis. So we love looking at different, what we call, black PR, right, in Russian, or some smear campaigns in the United States, looking at how certain claims are made about climate change and about climate change scientists. Like, for example, here is an example of typology that is developed on content analyzes hundreds and hundreds of thousands blogs and websites and Facebook posts of skeptics, right? So we use some software, and we use some technology that helps us with our analysis. And so the point of doing all of this is, when we study those rhetorical strategies, we better understand the motives behind, and then we engage in what we call machine learning. So we teach the machine how to recognize some of those themes, and how we recognize some of those trends, right? Like, for example, if we have like 5 major claims, like, for example, the first 4, yellow, orange, blue, and light blue, they focus on policies or science. What we see in green, those are particularly focused on personalities, like and scientists. For example, climate change science is unreliable. Why? Well, because it's a conspiracy, and media is biased, scientists are biased, climate change scientists are not real scientists, they don't know what they're talking about. So those are examples of most typical claims and rhetorical approaches that are used in those smear campaigns, right? And those things we'll love to study because that's what we specialize in, right? So the result is to become experts in those rhetorical strategies so we can educate the public and we can engage in media literacy, right? So we can teach media literacy to ordinary Americans so they can recognize some of those attacks in the media and stay away from them, right? So they can focus just on evidences instead of focusing on some myths and conspiracy theories. So just like I mentioned, one of the approaches that we use is called inoculation theory. So inoculation theory is like in medicine, you have to kind of get a flu shot or some vaccination against some bad disease. And what we see, misinformation on character attacks, compromise, it is bad disease. So you have to have a vaccine against it, right? And instead of vaccine, we use deconstruction, rhetorical questions and approaches that we prime the public with, so that people can get certain immunity against them, right? So, like for example, if we look at certain attacks that very much look like a lot of ad hominem attacks, like for example, one of them focuses on competence, well, Catherine is not really a proper climate change scientist. So the response would be, so who is a proper climate change scientist? So what is your evidence for this claim, right? And then pretty much it goes into sequential persuasion when we kind of like address each type of argument based on its category. Like for example, there is one has to do with like bias, right? So the global warming establishment is biased towards high neglect sensitivity, right? Again, there is a response against bias claims or moral claims or what we call circumstantial claims when there is accusations against climate change scientists and have nothing to do with the real academic or real scientific communities. So the point is that every time of category has its own response. And the more we study it and the more we look at how it happens online, the more we can actually teach the machine, the software, how to recognize those things online. So when we spot it, so we can monitor the web and respond in the real-time format. And that's exactly how you counter misinformation, how you counter reputational attacks nowadays. So we do conferences, we publish reports. I give a lot of presentation about what we do. Like for example, this is a screenshot from my presentation from the National Press Club, where I spoke in front of scientists who kind of like worry about things that really matter. Like for example, so last time when I spoke at the American Association for Science Advancement, I had people in the audience who are not just represent human studies, but they focus on like physics, and there are geographers, oceanographers, environmental specialists. So all these people are kind of concerned now because again, the territory of their science becomes reduced and becomes neutralized by contrarians, and they all need to know.
Sorry, all the balls have been shown, and we are all running out of time. Okay.
Okay. So there is a last slide, and so there is a last slide. The what we this is a kind of in a way the climax of our research. We are publishing a handbook based on things we have done and based on 4 types of expertise that our CARP Center has produced. So it has 31 chapters It's multidisciplinary, so it has communication experts, it has psychology experts, experts in sociology, cultural studies. So it will be out in 2019, and I will be now happy to answer your questions.
Yes, I have one question, just short of time, but still, I have to ask you. We have a huge problem here. This huge problem is involving young people in science. And universities here again found out that it's easier to attract young people by saying universities are territories of fun rather than universities are territories of science. Do you have this problem? How do you solve it?
So what you're referring to is we call like science communication, and science communication has been on the rise in the last few years. We do have degree in science communication at George Mason, and there are two approaches to science communication. The one is so you take professional communicators and they get specialized in particular types of science. Like for example, I specialize in climate change and health communication. So my degree was in health communication. So I had to really study a lot of medicine and health approaches. Someone else specializes in something else, right? A different approach is you take a scientist and you teach them how to communicate. And what we found out, the second one was less effective because we know a lot of good scientists who like physicists and chemistry experts and I don't know, biophysicists, and they're terrible communicators. They write for themselves, they write for their colleagues, nobody reads them because they're boring. Students kind of fall asleep at their lectures because they're not fun. And it's a tough problem, but there are several ways how you can approach it. So you can start actually introducing students to science through what we used to have in Soviet Union through naучпоп, and so make science to be more digestible. In a way, you introduce first to fun facts. So, for example, explaining, do you know how, for example, how water runs in your house? Do you know the process behind what it takes to kind of like make water run in your house? Do you know why some water is warm, why some water is cold, right? So you can just introduce all these fun facts. And then you can slowly introduce to things that kind of on the more kind of complicated level. Because science could be really intimidating, and not everybody likes it because they think it's boring. They think it's only for people in white gowns. They think for people who just like old and kind of not fun anymore. So, and there are some old-fashioned approaches. You can always use opinion leaders and even celebrities who can explain and use their language to kind of get them involved. So, but responding to your question, yes, it is an issue, and it's an issue everywhere. It's not an issue just in Russia or in the United States. It's a global problem.
Thank you very much. Irina wants to say a couple of words. She came.
Сергей, спасибо, что были с нами. Очень рада, что все получилось. Я надеюсь, что мы сотрудничаем и далее.
Продолжаем.
Спасибо большое. До встреч, до новых в эфире, а может быть и не только в эфире. До свидания.